A very warm welcome. You're watching News 18 Global. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. Khalistan terrorism is now at the center of India and Canada's standoff. And on Monday, Ottawa expelled a top Indian diplomat. This amid a probe into the killing of pro-Khalistan terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar on Canadian soil. Shockingly enough, the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has claimed credible allegations of a potential link between agents of the Indian government and the killing of Nijjar. Soon after, New Delhi expelled a senior Canadian diplomat, Olivier Sylvestre. He has been ordered to leave India within 5 days. While many are calling it a tit-for-tat move, New Delhi's decision reflects its growing concern. This at the interference of Canadian diplomats in India's internal matter and their involvement in anti-India activities. It should also be noted that Hardeep Singh Nijjar was gunned down on 18th of June this year outside a Sikh cultural center in Surrey. So who is Hardeep Singh Nijjar? He hailed from a village in Punjab, Jalandhar. He moved to Canada in the year 1996 and got involved with terrorism with Babbar Khalsa International. He established his own group, banned terrorist group named Khalistan Tiger Force. He was also associated with banned Indian separatist group Sikhs for Justice, and at SFJ, Nijjar was number 2 after Gurpatwant Singh Pannu. So much so, an Interpol Red Corner notice was also issued against Nijjar in the year 2016. In the meantime, let's now play out what Canada's Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister had to say.
Over the past number of weeks, Canadian security agencies have been actively pursuing credible allegations of a potential link between agents of the Government of India and the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Last week at the G20, I brought them personally and directly to Prime Minister Modi in no uncertain terms. Any involvement of a foreign government in the killing of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil is an unacceptable violation of our sovereignty. It is contrary to the fundamental rules by which free, open, and democratic societies conduct themselves. In the strongest possible terms, I continue to urge the Government of India to cooperate with Canada to get to the bottom of this matter. I also expect it to reiterate that its position on extrajudicial operations in another country is clearly and unequivocally in line with international law.
We've been clear, we will not tolerate any form of foreign interference. Since this was brought to our attention, we've been guided by 3 principles. The first one, we will seek the truth. The second one, we will protect Canadians at all times. And thirdly, we will protect Canada's sovereignty. I've conveyed these principles to my Indian counterpart, and I've also told him that we expect India's full collaboration to make sure that we get to the bottom of this. And as of today, and as a consequence, we've expelled a top Indian diplomat from Canada.
Canada said on Monday it had credible information linking Indian government agents to the murder of a Sikh separatist leader in British Columbia in June, an accusation India dismissed as absurd and motivated. Canada also said it had expelled a senior Indian intelligence official but gave no details. The separatist leader, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, was shot dead outside a Sikh temple in Surrey, British Columbia on June 18th. Nijjar supported a Sikh homeland in the form of an independent Khalistani state and was labelled a terrorist by India in 2020, according to Indian media. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Monday did not directly accuse India of being involved. However, he did say his country's security agencies had been pursuing allegations of links between Nijjar's death and India's government.
Any involvement of a foreign government in the killing of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil is an unacceptable violation of our sovereignty. It is contrary to the fundamental rules by which free, open, and democratic societies conduct themselves. As you would expect, we've been working closely and coordinating with our allies on this very serious matter.
Minister Singh, director of the Canadian Sikh Coalition, said Monday his community wanted to see what Ottawa would do next.
We have a mixed kind of emotion right now. That's kind of, one is we're acknowledging that Canada has acknowledged India as an actor and done it from Parliament. And on the other side, we're wondering what the next steps are going to be as well. So I think there's mixed feelings at the moment.
Canada has the highest population of Sikhs outside their home state of Punjab in India. It's also been the site of many demonstrations that have irked India. Monday's announcement will likely further strain bilateral ties, with New Delhi already unhappy that Canadian authorities did not crack down on Sikh protesters. The two countries were earlier trying to hammer out a trade deal by the end of this year, but have now frozen talks. Canada gave few details, while India cited, quote, certain political developments.
What will be the impact of these deteriorating diplomatic relations between Canada and India? Let's try and delve deeper into this. And for that, let me introduce my guests today. I'm joined in by Michael Kugelman, who's the director at the South Asia Institute at Wilson Center. I'm also joined in by Dean Baxendale, who's a renowned columnist from Canada. Many thanks to you, gentlemen, for joining in. Michael, if I could begin with you. India's External Affairs Ministry has said that allegations of the government of India's involvement in any act of violence in Canada are quote-unquote absurd and motivated. Trudeau says his allegations are based on intelligence gathered by the Canadian government. In such a scenario, before the investigation arrives upon a conclusion, is Trudeau's reaction rash and impulsive?
Well, certainly the fact that Prime Minister Trudeau himself came out with these allegations and did it so publicly is indeed very striking. One would have expected perhaps that it would have been done more discreetly, which is typically how these things work in diplomacy, though honestly I would argue perhaps that this is a reflection of how strained the relationship is between Canada and India. The fact that the Prime Minister simply was not willing to give attention to the notion of being discreet and not really caring about the possible ramifications for relations with India by making this bombshell allegation so publicly, and standing in front of the House of Commons as well. And I would also say that for the Prime Minister to come out and make these allegations publicly, that suggests that he feels quite strongly about how accurate they are, for the fact that he would go out there and be so open about it.
All right, Dean, if I could bring you in on this. Many are calling it a knee-jerk reaction, because that's exactly what I was asking Michael, because the investigation is still not completed, even though Canada claims that there's intelligence input coming in. But how do you weigh in on this reaction?
Well, I think at this particular point in time, what has happened is that supposedly, according to contacts that I've reached out to, and reading also the Globe and Mail was about to break the story that the credible intelligence comes from the RCMP investigation in Vancouver or Surrey, British Columbia, where this incident took place, and Nijjar was murdered, and also through CSIS. This supposedly was one of the topics that Justin Trudeau had been raising or trying to raise with Modi while he was there in India for the G20. Have we jumped, or has the Prime Minister jumped to conclusions? I guess that is going to play out over the next 30 days or so when we see more evidence as to the allegations. But for a Prime Minister to rise in the House of Commons to suggest that a foreign government has been involved with a murder, ostensibly an assassination, of a person on Canadian soil, and whether or not Nijjar was a citizen or not is still a question mark. But obviously that's egregious behavior by a foreign government, if true.
Michael, Nijjar is one or was one of the most wanted terrorists with an Interpol notice that was issued against him in 2016. What does it speak of the Canadian government's support to Khalistan extremism?
So I think this is a reflection of just why there's such a conundrum here for India and for Canada, for that matter. That indeed for India, this is someone who was a terrorist, who is a dangerous figure, who is a bona fide security threat to India. But Canada looks at these issues very differently in the sense that it emphasizes notions of rule of law and freedom of speech and so on, and it's not willing to act as robustly as India would prefer it act to address these Indian security concerns. And I think that's a big reason why we're where we are today with the state of this relationship, because for India, it's a no-brainer in the sense that this is someone that needs to be apprehended, that someone needs to be dealt with, others like him as well. But for Canada, there's just a very different position taken. And one can understand when there's such differing views of how to go about this, that the two capitals would be at the loggerheads that they are now.
Right. Dean, you heard what Michael had to say. What explains these differing views? Because remember, when you talk about Canada's support to Khalistan extremism, it goes beyond Nijjar. Let's not forget what we saw happen in Brampton. That float, in fact, almost celebrated the assassination of India's former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi.
Yes, in Terry Molesky's book, the former CBC correspondent, which I've been reading, and bought that book actually while I was in Delhi in April, spoke to the Khalistani separatist movement being homegrown within Canada and not within the province of Punjab per se. As far as the red notice goes, I think we have to be, we'll take it that this is a valid red notice, but I do know of a number of dissidents who have spoken out specifically against the Chinese Communist Party and human rights activist for the Uyghur, head of the World Uyghur Congress, Dolkan Issa, who was also banned from coming to India, had a Interpol red notice against him, accusing him of being a terrorist, a murderer, separatist, and that was on his record for 21 years. Now, I would, in this particular case, and I don't know the details of the red notice that India had provided the information for this. The reality is that the Canadian government has chosen not to prosecute or, even it appears to look further into Mr. Nijjar's direct organization and with Sikh separatism or having a separatist state in Punjab for Sikhs. So I think we have to be careful about the red notice, but the reality is that Canadians have had their own experience directly with terrorism going back to the late 60s with the Fédération de Libération du Québec and called the FLQ when they kidnapped Pierre Laporte, a British diplomat, and he was assassinated. We brought out the War Measures Act, martial law to stop this from playing out. And we then had a close to 30-year struggle with various referendums on, Quebec separating from Canada. In the end, they chose to stay within Canada.
Michael, the question still remains. The kind of support we've seen Canada give a Khalistan movement is not what we've really seen coming from UK or Australia, even US. The British government has allocated new funds to tackle pro-Khalistan extremism. Australia has made assurances to curb the movement, also reflects the global community's commitment to bringing justice. Why is Canada so apathetic and tone deaf to India's concerns?
No, it's certainly important to note that there has been a differing responses from these different countries that have these activists on their territory, and I think indeed the perception is that Canada has been much more reticent than any of the other countries to address Indian concerns not even offering public statements, public condemnations when there have been demonstrations that turn violent directed at Indian diplomatic facilities. And we have seen that happen in some of these other countries where the governments have condemned these things. I don't have an answer, to quite frankly, though I think, again, that Canada is a country that really emphasizes this notion of freedom of speech, freedom of freedom to gather and demonstrate and so on. That I think that the Canadian government simply has chosen to be very cautious about how it handles this issue. Now, there's some that suggest that there's domestic political factors at play here in Canada, that the Canadian government is trying to be cautious about not wanting to alienate the Sikh diaspora community. I can't speak to whether that's true or not, though I think that has to be seen in the context of this question about why has the Canadian government's response been so much less robust and so much less emphatic than India would like to see, especially compared to how governments in the UK and Australia and the US have responded to this issue.
Let me bring in Dean on that. Dean, how do you weigh in on what even Michael's saying? Because the reticent approach adopted by the Canadian government is in fact getting blatant day by day.
Yeah, that remains a mystery. But I think it lies in part in the fact that we have a diaspora Indian community here in Canada of over 1.4 million within our Canadian population. Of that, 770,000 have identified themselves as practicing Sikhism or here in Canada. And the governments, quite frankly, and this is what is being done within the China diaspora community and the Iranian diaspora community in many respects, is that foreign governments have ultimately influence operations inside Canada and other democratic nations to stand for and allow, in some cases, these extremists or individuals that are known to be criminals to operate with impunity, and foreign governments and whoever is behind the Sikh, the Khalistani separatist movement, and there are many, certainly are gaining or have had political influence in this country to diffuse and to obfuscate those operations here in Canada.
Michael, what we are now witnessing between India and Canada marks a new low in diplomatic relations between both the nations. What explains this deteriorating relationship?
I think that the reason why things are so bad now in terms of relations is that we have seen what appears to be stepped up activism and protest by these Sikh activists, including those that support the idea of Khalistan and a separate state. We've seen this activity increasing in Canada and also in the UK and Australia, and I think that has sharpened Indian concerns about this issue and likely has caused India to increase its pressure on Canada to deal with this issue that India regards as a major concern, and Canada has doubled down and not address this issue in the way that India would like. So I think it's that combination of just more happening on the ground, so to speak, growing Indian concerns and pressure on Canada, and Canada is really taking the same position that it's taken for quite some time. And I think that's a big reason why we are here today. And it also appears that when Prime Minister Trudeau visited New Delhi, it wasn't a very good visit. They had Prime Minister Trudeau had a very tense meeting with Prime Minister Modi. And then, of course, the whole weird controversy with Trudeau's airplane, I think, sort of led into these existing tensions and mistrust and so on. And that could be a contributing factor as well to Trudeau's decision to go public with these allegations.
Right. Dean, one can't help but wonder, why is Canada digging its heels into the ground so firmly, that too for an issue which the world is acknowledging as a modern face of terrorism as far as Khalistan movement is concerned?
I think really this, comes down to, we can trace it in part back to the ill-fated Justin Trudeau visit to India 3 years ago, in part. And in fact, I think the recognition by the Indian government that they didn't feel they had a partner in the Canadian government, which seems to be what is being expressed within the Indian media and certainly in Modi's comments. And unfortunately, it's at a time where we need to have consensus between like-minded democracies to fight terrorism, to fight transnational repression, and to fight election interference by foreign and malign states within our own politics. So it's a dangerous time, and when we need to be creating trade opportunities, right now two-way trade is about $8 billion US between India and China. It's about an equal two-way trade relationship, and there's opportunities to expand that dramatically. But we all must, to your point, be aligned on the issues around extremism that is being perpetrated within our own countries.
All right, my last question, which I'd like to take from you both gentlemen. Michael, will the tense diplomatic relations between India and Canada finally impact the deep-rooted people-to-people connections, not to forget the thriving trade and economic ties that remain so prolific so far?
This, I think, is what's very concerning. And we know that there's a very large trade relationship between India and Canada. India views Canada as one of its key Western trade partners. And what we've seen is that trade has gotten caught up in the broader tensions in the relationship. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Canada very recently announced it was halting talks with India on a new trade deal. I think it's tied to this broader issue. And that's very concerning for the relationship, because many relationships, even when they're strained, can continue to have cordial commercial relations. I mean, you look at the India relationship with China, for example. There's still a lot of trade going on there. So the fact that trade appears to have become caught up in this broader tension point in the relationship, it's an ominous sign for a relationship that I believe each capital would very much like to continue to flourish. But given how bad things are, and given that these tensions are seeping into other what would one expect to be safer areas like trade, it's not a good sign for the relationship.
All right, Dean, let me have your closing thoughts on this entire matter. Do you think that the fallout is going to be one that will have lasting impact?
I think that remains to be seen. I think, first of all, we have to let this investigation take place. I think we have to have it, go its natural course. If the RCMP and CSIS are making specific allegations with respect to the murder of an individual on Canadian soil, then we have to let that play out. And we don't know that it wasn't within the Sikh community that could have been involved with this, rival gangs, etc., that could have perpetrated this crime. So we must let that play out. And if it's found to indeed be true that India was somehow involved, then I think that will create significantly higher tensions, and something that we need to work out very quickly at a negotiating table, understanding the positions of both governments, and try to move forward in a positive, proactive way that adheres to the rule of law, understands where red notices are issued for individuals, that we must seriously look into those allegations, and we must act as a nation to protect our sovereignty and security, and not to allow this to these kinds of manifestations of a Sikh separatist movement take place on our soil. I think all the Indian diaspora community in Canada wants peace, wants to have good relations with India. We want to see that relationship grow and opportunities to grow for trade. And I think we have a bright future together, but obviously this is a significant hurdle.
All right, many thanks to you, Dean and Michael, for joining in on this discussion. We'll have to see how this entire controversy actually folds out in the next few days. As we all have already informed you that the investigation is still ongoing. On that note, it's a quick wrap from my end. Thank you so much for watching News 18 Global.